Hi everyone, this lesson is on half angle identities. So first we're going to start with a review or warm up. So simplify the following trig expressions. So the first one right here, to get started on this one, is we're going to change everything to sine and cosine. And in doing that, I'm going to get 1 plus sine of x over cosine of x divided by 1 plus cosine of x over sine of x. I'm going to try to get the denominators the same on the top and the bottom. So I'm going to multiply this by cosine of x over cosine of x, and this one by sine of x over sine of x. And in doing that, what that's going to give me is cosine of x plus sine of x all over cosine of x. And that's divided by, big division here, that's this division line right here, sine of x plus cosine of x all over sine of x. And so with this, we're going to multiply, being this is my division line here, I'm going to take my numerator, divide by my denominator. So that means I'm going to say cosine of x plus sine of x over cosine of x. Dividing is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So now I'm going to have sine of x on top and sine of x plus cosine of x on the denominator. This quantity and this quantity are the same, so we're going to divide those out and make 1. And I'm left with sine of x over cosine of x, and sine of x over cosine of x is just tangent of x. And so therefore we simplified that expression. So for this one right here, we're going to simplify that again into sines and cosines. And so this one right here is going to be 1 over cosine of x plus sine of x over cosine of x. So that's tangent divided by, and then these three things here. So we've got secant of x. Secant of x is 1 over cosine of x. Tangent is plus sine of x over cosine of x and minus cosine of x. What you do see is that the denominators up here are the same. So that means this is over 1. So those aren't all the same here, but the top ones are. So I can go 1 plus sine of x all over cosine of x. And then I have my big division sign here. That's this value right here, divided by this. Now, before I can simplify these and combine them, I need to multiply this by cosine of x over cosine of x, because that makes 1. So what I have is 1 plus sine of x minus cosine squared of x, and that's all over cosine of x. Okay, and what'll happen is I multiply by the reciprocal, because once I divide and I multiply by my reciprocal, my cosines are going to cancel. And so I'm going to be left with 1 plus sine of x over this right here. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and that is, see this right here and this right here, okay? 1 minus cosine squared of x, that's sine squared of x. So I'm going to go sine squared of x, and then this one right here, which says plus sine of x. And so my final, or second to the last step, is 1 plus sine of x here. I'm rewriting the top over, I'm going to factor out a sine of x. And so I have 1 factored out, sine of x plus 1. This quantity on top and this quantity down here are going to cancel and make 1. So I have 1 over sine of x, which is equal to cosecant of x. Box that up. Make sure that's deleted. Okay. All right. So another warm up. We just covered double angles last week. So let's review that real quick. I would suggest that everybody make a graph of the angle. We're in quadrant 3. And so quadrant 3 is down here. All right, I'm going to make my angle in quadrant 3. This comes up. We know sine of x, or my angle, is 1 over negative 1 over 8. This is what? 64 minus 1, which is the square root of 63, which is the square root of 9 times square root of 7. So that's this value here will be negative 3 root 7. And so I need sine of 2x, or 2 theta. So sine for the double angle formula is going to be 2 sine x cosine x. So it'll be 2 times sine. Sine is given, so that's negative 1 over 8, times cosine, which is adjacent, over hypotenuse. And so, I can actually cancel my 2 with one of these values here. A negative times a negative is a positive. So now I have 3 root 7 all over 32. Okay, so that's sine of 2x. Cosine of 2x, pick one. I like this one that says cosine squared of x minus sine squared of x. And so that being the case, I have cosine squared. Now this was my value here. Okay, so I'm going to keep that negative root 63 quantity squared. So cosine is going to be adjacent over hypotenuse. So that's going to be over 8. That's also squared. Minus sine squared. And sine squared is going to be opposite over hypotenuse. So negative 1 over 8 quantity squared. So what we have is 63 over 64 minus 1 over 64, which makes 62 over 64. And I'm going to reduce that by 2. And reducing this by 2, I'm going to make that's going to be 31 over 32. Okay, divide by 2. All right, tangent is going to be its own formula, but I'm just going to use sine over cosine. So that's going to be 3 root 7 over 32 divided by 31 over 32. My 32s will cancel when I multiply by the reciprocal. And now I'm going to get 3 root 7 over 31. And that's tangent of 2 theta. So here we go with our half angle formulas. Now, whereas just a few minutes ago we were working with double angles, now we're working with half angles. So in doing this right here, just try to, there's just a lot of different formulas that you guys have to remember. And what's going to happen is most likely on the quiz, you'll have like a matching where you'll have some of the formulas already given to you on the paper. And then if you can recognize which formulas go with which, otherwise to have to memorize all these is just quite a bit of formulas, so much. So try to remember for sine is minus up here, and then you have 1 minus cosine of theta over 2. Cosine is plus. Tangent is this, which is minus over plus, or it could be any one of these. So you've got all of these formulas that you can use for your half angle formulas, okay? So the first one that we're going to start with is, this right here is just a derivation of sine of theta over 2. So you're welcome to look through this and work them through yourself. I'm not going to go through these, but you do see that they are here. You can refer back to them at any time. So what I want to start off is to see these formulas, see if it works actually. So our job is to find the exact value of sine of 30 degrees. Now remember, this is a half angle formula. We already know what sine of 30 degrees is. The sine of 30 degrees is a half. So that my final answer will be a half. That being said, let's prove it, okay? So we know that sine of 30 degrees is equal to 1/2. We're going to just kind of put that away and just remember, come back to that. We're going to use a half angle formula to get to that. Basically, that means that theta divided by 2, that's going to equal 30 degrees. So because we're using a half angle formula, we're going to cross multiply. Theta is equal to 60. So when I use my half angle formula, I'm actually using 60 degrees. Now it equals plus or minus, so that's 60 over 2, plus or minus the square root of, now remember this is 1 minus cosine of x over 2. So this angle, 60 degrees, is going to go, this angle is going to go right in here, okay? So what we have now is plus or minus the square root of 1 minus cosine of 60 degrees all over 2. And this is still under the root. All of that's under the root. Now, if you recall, for 60 degrees, here's 60, here's 30, this is 1, 2, and this is the square root of 3. So cosine is a half. And so what it's asking me to do is it's saying plus or minus 1 minus a half, and this is all divided by 2. Again, still everything's under the root. Now you need to simplify that, and I'm going to multiply by 2 over 2. So I'm going to get 2 halves minus 1 half makes 1 half. So this is 1 half divided by 2, and that 2 is over 1. Now keep in mind, division is multiplying by reciprocal. So that's going to be equal to 1 half times 1 half, still under the root, which is 1/4. And the square root of 1 over 4 is the same thing as saying the square root of 1 over the square root of 4, which is 1 half. And the other thing that I want that you really need to remember is that 30 degrees is in the first quadrant, okay? And that it's positive in that quadrant. So your job is to try to find the exact value of sine of 30 degrees. So that is plus. So the plus or minus here, this is a plus. So to find the exact value of sine of 15 degrees, so for this one, we're going to use that half angle formula because, well, sine of 30 was pretty simple to do because we already knew the answer. We don't have a value for sine of 15 degrees. What you did in the past was you did a sum or difference formula where you said, well, I can say sine of 15 degrees is sine of, 45 degrees minus 30 degrees. So I could have used that as a difference formula, but what we're going to do is we're going to use the half angle formula. So in doing that, remember, theta over 2 is equal to 15. So for me, I'm going to use 30 degrees. So you're going to go sine of 30 degrees divided by 2, which is your 15, is equal to plus or minus, and this, remember, it's square root of, and it's 1 minus cosine of 30 degrees all over 2. And that's going to equal plus or minus the square root of 1 minus cosine of 30 is the square root of 3 over 2, and that's all still over 2. I need to get a common denominator to combine these two terms right here. So that's 2 over 2. So that's going to equal plus or minus 2 minus the square root of 3. You're going to leave that like that. Don't mess with that. Over 2. And then this is divided by, right? Divided by. So that's multiplied by the reciprocal. And so now it's over a fourth. So let's see. I got extra space here, I guess. So coming this way, we're going to get the square root of 2 minus the square root of 3, and this is 2 times 2, which is 4, over the square root of 4, which is 2. And so for this problem right here in this quadrant, so what do we know? We know that using the half angle formula for being positive or negative, so because 15 degrees is positive, this right here is not negative. We're going to get rid of this negative because obviously that's a positive value. And from there, we're done. So I can do this and find this just to check. I can plug this answer, which is my final answer, into my calculator. So if you plug that into your calculator, you're going to get approximately 0.2588. Okay, so what you would need to do is you would need to use your calculator and type in sine of 15 degrees, make sure you're in degrees, this should equal this, just as this equals this. And so therefore confirming that my answer is correct. Now what we have down here is just saying what the positive value is. And let me see if, I don't know if you can see that whole part, but sine of 15 degrees, working this out. And this is just if you had a calculator and doing it by calculator, but what do we need a calculator for when we could do this by hand, right? Okay, so the next one that we're going to do is to try to find cosine of 105 degrees. Now, remember how on the previous problem, we could have done sine of this instead of using a half angle formula to find it. We could have used a sum or difference formula. Well, here we're going to actually do that. So we're going to do this two different ways. So using a sum or difference formula for this, I would say that this would be, let me move this up a little bit, okay? Cosine, let's see, so I'm going to say that that's cosine of 60 plus 45 degrees. And remember, cosine goes cosine, cosine. If that's plus, this is minus, and then it'll be sine of 60, sine of 45. So cosine of 60 degrees is 1/2, and this is root 2 over 2. Minus sine of 60 is root 3 over 2 times root 2 over 2. So this makes root 2 over 4 minus root 6 over 4, which makes root 2 minus root 6 all over 4. So that's what I get for my answer for this problem right here. That is approximately going to be negative 0.2588. Okay, now let's try to remember where 105 degrees is. 105 degrees is in this quadrant here. So what's happening here at 105 degrees is, remember this, all students take calculus. Well, sine is positive in this quadrant, which means cosine is not. So therefore, see, as I got a negative value, so that just verifies for that. Now remember, we're going to go theta over 2. We're going to use a half angle formula, is 105. So the actual angle that I'm going to use is 210. So cosine of 210 degrees is equal to, and that's over 2, plus or minus, we know our answer is going to be minus, the square root of 1 plus cosine of theta all over 2. And so what's happening here is I need to figure out what cosine of 210 degrees is. So this is negative square root of 1 plus cosine of 210 degrees all over 2. Well, cosine of 210 degrees, let's see what that is. Let's see. Let's erase that. We'll go, oh, here's my angle over here. So here's our angle at 210 degrees, which makes it, oh, hold on 1 second. We doubled it, remember? So 210 goes down here, all right, coming back up this way. So we're going to go 210 degrees minus 180, okay? And that's going to be 30 degrees. Across from 30 is negative 1. This is 2. This is the square root of 3. So cosine is the adjacent over hypotenuse. So this value right here is going to be negative root 3 over 2. So what we have here is the square root of negative, and we have 1 minus the square root of 3 over 2. Now, I need to make this 2 over 2 and to combine these. So that'll be 2 minus the square root of 3 all over 2. That's this part, 2 minus the square root of 3 all over 2. So I just did this part right here. Divided by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by its reciprocal, which is 1/2. So this still is under the root. And what we have is the opposite of this, which is going to be 2 minus the square root of 3 all over the square root of 4. Well, the square root of 4 is 2. Now, take this answer right here and type that into your calculator, and guess what you're going to get? The same answer. This answer will be negative 0.2588. And so just keep that in mind, what you're doing here as far as this problem. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. Okay, that was it. All right, let's see what the next, we have one more problem. So tangent of pi over 8. So for this problem, I'm trying to find tangent of pi over 8. So we're going to go, to get pi over 8, we would go pi over 8. I think we would go pi over 4. Pi over 4 divided by 2 over 1. So when I multiply by the reciprocal, I'm going to go times 1/2, which makes pi over 8. So this is the value that I need to use. And so for tangent, there's a couple of different formulas that you can use. I'm going to use, I think, this one that says sine of pi over 4 divided by 1 plus cosine of pi over 4. This comes from, let me go back to the top. Oops, right there. So this one comes from this right here, where I have sine of theta over 1 plus cosine of theta. And so I'm going to use that formula. You can use any of the formulas you want. There's that one, there's this one, or there's this one. Okay, you can use any of them that you want. I'm just going to use that first one, and that, so we know that sine of pi over 4 is pi over 2, square root of 2 over 2 over 1 plus the square root of 2 over 2. This is 2 over 2. And so what that does for us is it gives us the square root of 2 over 2 divided by 2 plus the square root of 2 over 2. My 2's are actually going to cancel. And then I'm going to get the square root of 2 over 2 plus the square root of 2. Now, you're actually not going to leave your answer like that, because that is not a proper form. So we're going to rationalize the denominator. So I'm going to come over here. I get 2 plus the square root of 2. Now what I'm going to do is multiply it by its conjugate, which is 2 minus the square root of 2 over 2 minus the square root of 2. And I'm going to get 2 times this. Now, keep in mind, numbers get multiplied by numbers. See this 1 out in front? That's what 2 gets multiplied by. So now we have 2 root 2 minus, and then you have root 2 times root 2, which is square root of 4, which is 2. That's it. And then over this, now we're going to FOIL, okay? So 2 times 2 is 4. 2 times negative root 2 is negative 2 root 2. 2 times 1 is 2, so that's plus 2 root 2. And then root 2 times negative root 2 is negative root 4, which is minus 2. So we have 4 minus 2, which is 2. So far, I have this. So now what I'm going to do is factor out a 2. So I have 2 times root 2 minus 1 over 2. 2's are going to cancel and make 1. So my final answer is the square root of 2 minus 1. Okay. So that's all I have for you for today. Go ahead and start working on your review sheets. And you have a few things on Schoology that are due, so check out Schoology. And thanks for watching. I hope that helped.